that this is the annual memorial lecture for Professor Diane Touliatos, and I just talked about her work and her contributions to Greek studies. So we honor her memory and her work. Um, so Professor Danopoulos is a political scientist. He was the chair of the Department of Political Studies at San Jose State University, and he taught there for many years. His areas of expertise are comparative politics and international relations, and he has published 11 books and tens of articles on this topic. He has also been active with various committees, especially most notably with the armed forces. One of his specialties is civil and military relations. Um, he has received many awards from San Jose University, including teaching awards and awards. And he's here to talk to us today about the social and cultural roots of the Greek sovereign debt crisis. Professor Danopoulos, thank you so much for being here with us.
Good evening. I'm delighted to be back here in Missouri. Missouri is part of who I am. I received my degree here, but more importantly, and I want to emphasize this, I'm grateful to the taxpayers of Missouri for financing or help finance my education. So this enabled a poor immigrant to realize his dreams. And so Missouri is part of me, always will be. Our first son was born here as well. And so there are a lot of connections there. Let me thank the professor here who extended that invitation, Professor Cosmopoulos. I want to thank whoever pays for this program, the sponsors of this program. It's good to have these things. The number of Greeks seems to be going down, and so we need to do something to keep the flame alive, as it were. But in any case, what I want to do tonight is to talk to you about, not necessarily about the numbers relating to the closer? Okay, all right. All right, it's fine. I'm not going to talk to you, give you numbers about the debt. The debt has a background. Greece is in debt because there are certain things that happen in society or don't happen in society that have contributed to it and to some degree continue to contribute to it, although things seem to be improving. Now, there is an organization operating out of Germany, Berlin, Germany. It is called Transparency International. It's an NGO. It gets its money from various sources, private, some government money as well, with no strings attached. And every year they do a study, and they publish what they call a comparative corruption index. It includes just about all there are 192 countries, 93, depending on how we count in the world. They include, in the last 4 or 5 years, they've included about 80, 82, 180, 182 countries. So what do? Is they rank them. And they also give a score. The score is from 0 to 100 or 0 to 10, same thing, really. If a country gets a score that is below 5, that's considered corrupt. The lower the number, the more the corruption. The higher the number, the better. And then they rank countries, say 1, 2, 3, whatever. All right. Greece is not one of the most corrupt, but it certainly has a problem with it. It does have corruption. Greece's score hovers between 4.3, 4.4. This latest one showed an improvement, 4.2, 9, I believe. I'm sure you want to know where the U.S. stands. The U.S. is 7.5, 7.6. Who are the clean countries? Scandinavian countries. New Zealand is clean. Um, Canada is fairly clean. Australia is clean. At the lower end, North Korea, many of the African countries, and lately Venezuela has gone down considerably. Now, uh, so Greece shares company with places like Namibia and Malta, just to give you a point of comparison. Um, so there is a problem. So what I like to do tonight is see if I can provide some background to that, some explanation as to why there is corruption. And corruption doesn't come from the blue sky, like everything else, or just about everything else has a home. It has a connecting point. It has a springboard. It comes from somewhere. And that something is culture. So my aim tonight is to define what I mean by corruption and what I mean by culture, establish the connection between the two, then place Greece on this continuum, and then talk about the sources of corruption. And at the end, if there is time, as I hope there will be, I like to say a few things about how things look today and where we go from here. So let's begin with corruption. What is corruption? The most commonly used term or perception is that if you use your position to line up your pockets with money, whatever, profits, that's considered corruption. True, but there's a lot more to it than that. Corruption also involves nepotism. If you hire your cousin because he or she happens to be your cousin, although he or she may not have the best background or the qualifications, that's corruption. If you, let's say, cover for someone who doesn't show up for work, but you kind of cover for him, or you make it possible for him to show as though to make it possible for him to say, yeah, I was here, even though he or she was not there. All those are corruption. Corruption is a broad concept. I will use it in this way, the broad concept, the encompassing concept. What is culture? Culture is the values, the attitudes, the beliefs, the orientations, the underlying assumptions among the people of a society. In other words, culture is what you need to know to be able to get along in a society, to be able to function. And where do we learn culture? In school, home, in church. And many of the things we do, they come to us without really realizing. So culture provides for you the glasses through which you see the world. It provides an explanation as to why you do what you do, and more. So it's an all-encompassing concept as well. Now, is there a connection between the two? The answer is yes, there is a connection. So what I want to do is very briefly sketch out for you some of the components of the connection between culture and corruption. I'm going to sketch out briefly 7 points. First one is what I call, what's been called, not mine necessarily, uncertainty avoidance. By that I mean that how an individual relates to society. Put differently, a society, country that puts value, likes order, likes consistency, likes structure, likes to have laws. It wants to be everything to be to have written records, let's say. That country is likely to be less corrupt than a country that relies more on word of mouth, unwritten rules, and things of that nature. Structure is not important for countries with low corruption, with low avoidance. With low uncertainty avoidance. So that's one point. Second point is what I would call future orientation. This is about, simply put, about planning. Societies plan. Some do it better than others. Some societies don't do very well in terms of planning. Greece is one of them. Planning is not something that they value. It happens if it happens, and we change our minds tomorrow. Societies that do plan, do value planning, tend to be less corrupt than those that tend to operate on what's good for today, and we'll see about tomorrow, kind of short-term kind of a thing. But the third point is what is called institutional or societal collectivism. That is, if a society encourages its individuals, its citizens, its people, its social groups to promote such things as we're together, to promote such things as economic prosperity, competitiveness, innovation, all these make it possible for that society to be less corrupt than a society that does the opposite. That is a society that does not plan, that is a society that does not promote what is called societal collectivism. The fourth is individual or group collectivism. What is that? Individual is about the family, is about the village, is about the local community, but not much beyond that. Societies that put emphasis on the local stuff, on the family, what they call familial connections, tend to be more corrupt than those that prize such things as collectivism. We're in this together. Let's work together kind of mentality. 5 is human orientation. What's human orientation? That is how society likes to award fairness, how generous a society is, the standards of performance it puts forth, high on those, low in corruption. The opposite is true. A society that doesn't promote that doesn't put value on human orientation, tends to have issues with corruption, more so than others. Then number 6 is performance orientation. What's performance orientation? Is to promote such things as competitiveness, individual initiative, can-do attitude, as opposed to a more lax, short-term, we'll see about tomorrow, and tomorrow comes, and then we may not know what we will do tomorrow. But nevertheless, the short-term thing tends to lead to more corruption. The long-term thing tends to promote less corruption. Then the last one is what I would call power distance. The greater the disparity between the rulers and the ruled, the greater the disparity, the more corrupt a society tends to be. The opposite is true. A society in which has an innate dislike towards power, but likes order, likes the government to perform and all that, tends to put more emphasis on what I would call good governance. Now, there are a couple more that, oh, by the way, these have been statistically tested, and the correlation between them does exist in each and every one of the 7. There are 2 more, very briefly, that are probably as important, but the correlation cannot be established, and that is, one of those is gender equality, or egalitarianism, it's called. The gap between women and men, if it's great, society tends to be more corrupt. If it's less, it's less. And the other is assertiveness, how assertive, how tough individuals are. These last 2 have not been tested, but there cannot, the correlation between them has not been established. Now, where do we go from here? A major study was done about 10, 15 years ago called Globe. It involved 170 researchers and 62 countries. Data was collected on issues that I just mentioned to you very, very briefly. And then they went ahead and established, if you will, a pattern. Uh, Greece ranks is one of the 62 countries, but it ranks low in just about all of them, below 5. So it's considered quite low. So the globe data supports the theoretical findings as well as the ranking of of Transparency International that Greece does have a major corruption problem. So then, let me come closer to what we want to talk about, and that is, what are the sources of corruption in Greece, if it does exist? And I think those of us who've lived there or have visited the country have seen evidence of that. It's there, sometimes not as visible, other times more visible, but nevertheless, corruption is an issue. So the question then is, what are the sources? What are the underlying assumptions and sources of corruption? I'm going to concentrate on 4 of them. One is geography. The second is religion. The third is historical legacy. And the fourth is the nature of politics. Let's begin geography as a major contributor to corruption. By geography, I don't mean just simply a geographic location. Greece happens to be where it happens to be, or any other country. But I'm talking about the topography. I'm talking about their neighborhood, who the neighbors are, the historical process. And as far as Greece is concerned, geography is an important component and has contributed to corruption. How so? Geography can mean different things to different people. However, we do know that people like to set up home and live in countries where the climate is good, where it's easy to access, easy to move in and to move out. So it's no accident that throughout the centuries, Greece has been the recipient of people from just about all over the world, including Central Asia, who liked the climate, who and who decided to settle there and to live there, except that the topography, the tall mountains, the high mountains, made it impossible for the different settlements to communicate. So sometimes you had settlements, villages that lived very close to one another, but they did not really communicate all that much because there was a natural barrier there. The same thing, by the way, can be said about the Middle East, but there it's the desert. The desert is a natural barrier, but it's also a natural highway. People can move in and out, but the connection between the various settlements is not there. So one of the reasons you have the Quranic language, the language of the Quran, being the sort of the lingua franca throughout the Arab world, is because it's the only language they agree on. Each community, each village had its own language, its own idiom, much like in Greece. You know, you had 2 villages just a few miles apart, but the communication wasn't there, and the idiom, the language was also different. So what does this do long term in terms of corruption? We carry those things with us. Urbanization began in, say, late 19th century, 20th century. People went to Athens and they migrated to America and elsewhere, but they brought with them the same ideas. So in Athens, for instance, there was the Cafenio of the Corinthians, the Cafenio of the Argolidians, and so forth and so on. The same thing happened in the New World. All kinds of societies sprang up here, the Arcadians, the Macedonians, the Argolidians, the whatever. In your case, I think you have a lot of Roditas here, right? Societies, churches, all based on that. What does that do? Well, I'll take care of my compatriot. I'll hire him or her. Never mind who else applies for the job. Never mind if the other person is bad. I take care of my own. That, by definition, I think leads to corrupt practices, not necessarily exchanging money, but nepotism. Other issues enter the picture. Um, yeah, we can talk about this issue of geography forever, but it is important to realize that it is a source of how people feel, how people think, what they think, how they relate to one another, i.e. culture. And that has something to do, a direct connection, I will say, with how corrupt a society is or isn't. The second issue I would want to talk about is religion. And that's always a controversial issue, okay? Especially among Greeks, it's very difficult to sound critical. I'm not being critical here, and I'm in no way suggesting that Greek Orthodoxy or the Orthodox Church, the Orthodox faith, if you will, uh, tells people go out and be corrupt. It doesn't do that. In fact, it probably does the opposite. But what emanates from the way the religion is set up and its values do eventually lead to corruption. Now, we all know that Greece is an Orthodox country. 97, 98% are Greek Orthodox. There's a big issue with Orthodoxy. Orthodoxy, unlike Catholicism, does not have a central authority. It doesn't have a pope that has canonical, and it also has administrative jurisdiction. There is no such thing. There's 4 old patriarchates, the senior patriarchates, Istanbul or Constantinople, Antioch, Alexandria, Jerusalem, none of them on Greek soil. Okay, none of them. They're in the midst of other cultures, other religions, other societies. Take Istanbul, an example that we can talk about perhaps. Now, what does that do? Lack of administrative authority, a centralized authority, does not lead to a consistent, if you will, perception of what the religion is, what should it do, what it should not do. So what you have in Orthodoxy is ethnic churches. There's the Church of Greece, there's the Church of Serbia, there's the Church of Ukraine, and this and so many others that don't really connect with one another. In fact, in the Greek case, you have the Greek Orthodox Church that has sort of jurisdiction around Athens and much of Greece, but not over Macedonia. Crete has its own setup. Somehow they communicate, but not always so well. There's also, so the organizational problem is not a small one. There's no centralized authority. As a consequence, the Orthodox Church has yet to come up with a consistent set of values. For example, what does Orthodoxy believe about private enterprise? No position on it. What does Orthodoxy, what's the Orthodox Church's position on abortion? Officially, no, but turns a blind eye, and it happens right and left. Okay? A recent example, do we give, do we allow same-sex marriage? No. But then the Archbishop comes out and says, well, if the kids, if their church, if their children come to be baptized, we'll open the doors to them. So it's kind of here and there and there and here at the same time. So this organizational weakness leads to no position, and no position oftentimes allows for other elements to enter the picture and eventually lead to practices that may not sound religiously correct, but they're at the same time they seem to be tolerated. But there's also the doctrinal issue. Orthodoxy is about maintaining tradition, and there's nothing wrong with that. what does Orthodoxy say about the future? Has it said anything about private enterprise, human rights, the role of women, the identity cards? It's all over the map. It's all over the map. Unlike Protestantism, for instance, who has a very definite position on certain things. You know, in Protestant countries, or some Protestant countries, Germany included, there is what they call tithing. It's a part of your income goes to support the church. You choose the Catholic or the Protestant, whatever, it's your choice, but you cannot avoid it. If you're neither of those, well, smaller churches, okay, but you do contribute a part of your income. It's mandatory. The issue with Orthodoxy is that it centers on not only tradition, but at the same time, it sees the individual as part of a larger community, part of a collectivity. So the individual is a little too weak to fend for himself. It's better to be part of a community, of a collectivity. As a consequence is that Orthodoxy does not seem to promote, it doesn't do it intentionally anyway, it doesn't seem to promote such things as private enterprise, it doesn't, initiative, it doesn't promote innovation. Instead, it prizes such things as collectivity, let's take care of the community. It does not necessarily like wealth. It values poverty more than it does wealth, without actually saying it. So all these issues combined tend to create an environment where corruption can flourish. Lack of position allows for openness. Openness allows for things to happen. Now, the third thing is what I would call historical legacy. Here, it's a very complicated picture. Right from the beginning, even before the Greek state was set up back in the 1830s or early 30s, you had two competing value structures. On one hand, you had the captains and the Kolokotronides and these who wanted a weak central government. They wanted to be able to use the state for their own purposes. They did not necessarily like paying taxes. Who does? And on the other side, you had those who came from abroad, who believed in, who were, shall we say, influenced by the Enlightenment. They liked centralized government. They liked liberalism. They liked private enterprise. So you have two competing cultures, if you will, that operate side by side. The modernist and the traditional. The traditional is for such things as strong individuals, not necessarily strong governments, but individuals. Therefore, dictatorship is fine. It does not like private initiative very much. Private enterprise is okay, but is not valued. The state is there to take care of you, but you don't need to pay taxes. Somehow these things will happen without taxes. By contrast, you had the modernist culture, who believes in private enterprise, who wants a centralized liberal state, who values such things as initiative, ties with the West. So here you have the modernist culture that likes to be connected with the West, with the European Union, the United States, and on the other hand, you have very strong support for Russia. There is perhaps the majority of Greeks think that supporting Ukraine is a bad thing, and that what Russia is doing is fine. So you have two competing cultures here. Now, here comes the issue of corruption here. When you use personal connections, when you don't value the rule of law, when you like unwritten rules, as the as the as the as the, if you will, the traditional culture like, that opens the door for corruption. The modernists, on the other hand, try to fight that, and neither side can win. You have a tug of war going on for the last what is 200 years now. No side has been able to get the upper hand. Now, where the support comes from, the interesting thing is that support for the different values, the different sets, the traditionalists versus the modernists, comes from various parts of society. It does not have ideological identity. You know, a couple weeks ago, the Greek parliament voted to okay same-sex marriage, right? Guess which party voted against it? The Greek Communist Party. You would think it would be the opposite, right? You would think it would be the opposite. So what I'm trying to say here is that these two sets of values create an environment. There's a sort of a tug of war, and corruption is the winner, if you will. Now, finally, the nature of politics. One word does it all, I think. Clientelism. Greek politics is based on, you vote for me, I'll find a job for your son, I'll find a job for your daughter. If you don't, you don't. That's called clientelism. It continues. It was there from the beginning. The first prime minister, Yannis Koletis, is said to spend 3/4 of his time in office taking care of finding jobs for his supporters, for those or would-be supporters. So it's part of the society, part of the culture. And I was listening to an interview by the late Mitsotakis, the father Mitsotakis, and was asked, what about this thing? He said, what's wrong with that, he said. What's wrong with finding a job for an Asihorianos, a compatriot? What's wrong with that? Well, somebody gets the job, but someone else does not get that job, though the other person may be more qualified. Now, am I doing okay time-wise? All right, I'll wrap it up quickly. Now, where do we go from here? Can cultures change? The answer is yes. Difficult? Yes. Can happen? Yes. One of the government should play a major role here, is to educate the public. To this day, no Greek government has stepped forth to say to the Greeks, listen, by not paying your taxes, you contribute to what? The state having financial difficulties, and therefore the state has to lower your wages, has to lower your pension, and this and this and that. No one has done it. It's politically, everyone knows it, but it's not politically expedient to do it because it goes against the grain of what is known as clientelism. So, are things, is there all bleak? The answer is no. I think there is some room for hope here. First of all, the recent problem, the financial crisis, has perhaps bequeathed some good lessons. One of them is that finally, the society as a whole, not everyone obviously, but as a whole, is beginning to realize that that not paying your taxes doesn't work to your advantage. If anything, it works against you. So there is, if you will, beginning to see improvement. More importantly, the European Union has imposed on Greece an independent tax collection office, which is headed by a Missouri-born individual, right here in Columbia, who's done a marvelous job. So state revenue is beginning to go up considerably. How do they do it? They are forcing people to use credit cards. The cash thing obviously is a big problem. It leads to corruption. We all know that. It has taken a number of other steps with considerable opposition on some quarters of society. And so things seem to be moving in the right direction. the big problem remains the state apparatus, the bureaucracy, which has never functioned well, still does not function well. It's very hard to get things done unless you're willing to take care of them financially or whatever, and that is a problem. The other problem that goes with it, that contributes, I should say, is the fact that much of the Greek economy, particularly the food sector, is in the hands of families, private individuals. And so mom and dad and brother and sister all work in the restaurant. They don't pay taxes or pay very little because they're able to what? To hide whatever money they take in. Instead of paying $50, they pay, say, 10 or 20. So overall, the problem is still there. Greece has seen some improvement in the in the corruption index. It's now about 5, where it used to be down to 3. So there is slow improvement, a long way to go. So corruption and culture do have something in common, go hand in hand. So I'll stop here and take your questions. Thank you.